driving in my neighborhood with my son sitting next to me. He's 10 years old at the time. And all of a sudden this car comes and almost hits us. So I have to swerve and get out of the way. And out of my son's mouth he says this, "Teenage drivers." Mason, did you actually see that car? Was it a teenager? No, but just teenagers drive badly. Well, I actually did see them, and it was actually an elderly gentleman in our neighborhood who wished he was driving for NASCAR, not a teenager. Why did my son assume it was a teenager? It's called the problemizing of young people. Problemizing of young people. That's his implicit bias. He had heard that many times. He had caught that understanding. I forgot my clicker. How did that happen? That's awesome. So what we do when we problematize teenagers is adults end up standing in a fixing posture. Our job is to fix young people. You hear this throughout this case study. There's a litany of these. We will fix this problem of busyness, lack of attendance, anxiety, if, let's see them. Pastor says, if we get to the bottom of things with parents, if we do what is valuable, if we toughen up this snowflake generation, if we avoid medicating, if we take mental illness seriously, if we take away their phones, if we ensure their safety, we will fix this problem. Because what we do is we problematize young people. And this is actually very broad in Western societies and very much in the church, that young people are become problems of which we have to solve. They have some form of deficit. So our job as adults is to fix them. Problematizing young people feeds on narratives. I'm going to give you two examples, narratives of guilt and narratives of fear. I'm the mother of, thank you very much, Andy Root, 2 teenagers. And that guilt narrative is alive and well. I'm either not doing something that I should, like surely we do not read the Bible enough in my house, surely I do not take them enough to serve certain places, or I'm doing too much, right? So I'm the one that put the cell phone in their hand, and I'm the one that is giving them too much this or too much that or too much hovering. The guilt feeds problematizing children, problematizing young people. They become our problems to fix. The same is true for fear. Fear narrative with young people is so predominant. So we fear some things that are right to fear. So we fear their safety. We fear school shootings. We fear their success. Will they have enough job? Will they do what they need to do? We fear the types of friendships. And in the churches, we seem to be absorbed right now in the fear that they won't have faith. These narratives feed problematizing young people. I think of, out of that article, Jean Twin, she says it this way. We hear, and this drives my guilt, instead of making an impact in the world, they're making an imprint in their beds. That haunts me as a mom. Fear and guilt narratives. But what do they do? What does it do when we problematize? We actually reduce young people to being problems to solve rather than people to empower. So I want to call us to maybe do a little catechetical work, a little catechesis. Do I have any Lutheran friends, Roman Catholics in the room, right? So all you have to know is we're going to do a little question and answer. It'll be very simple. I want to ask this question. Who is God? Who is God? Let's orient us. You see, there's a narrative beyond fear and guilt and what other narratives that are driving parents and are driving churches as well. It's not just the parents that are driving us. What would be the narrative as we reoriented? Who is God? I want to talk about God as creator. God is creator. God creates freely. Nothing external to God forces God to create. In fact, that would actually mean that there was some authority over God, if that were true. Nothing internal to God forces God to create. Then that would actually mean that God creates to self-actualize in some way. Neither of those are true. God creates freely. Creator God means that God is distinct from the created, from creation. There's an unfathomable difference between us and God. God is eternal. We are finite. We are vulnerable. God is sovereign. All belongs to Creator God. God is the author of our existence. We cannot create ourselves. We are derived. God is infinite, God is sovereign, and we cannot create ourselves. Creator God declares that we are good 6 times in the Genesis narrative. The creation is called good. What does that mean? If that's true, that means that God freely loves young people. We don't make God love young people. God already loves young people. God doesn't become more God by loving. God freely loves. Young people, they belong to God. They actually are not our problem to fix or our problem to solve. They're dependent on God who sustains their lives. We do not. You see, kids living in their stress and anxiety. It's like they're living in a pressure cooker, or maybe you have a more cool, hip Instant Pot. Anyone have an Instant Pot out there, right? I love the Instant Pot. So I want you to imagine them living in a pressure cooker and start here. Just identity formation, just normal, healthy development means that they're living in a time of stress. So put them in the pressure cooker, right? Turn up the heat a little bit. The pressure starts going. And now throw in expectations of performance, expectations of achievement that come from sports and school and, yes, church. Expectations, and churn up the pressure on that. And can you hear it? Hiss, 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 hissing along. Imagine what it's like to live in that world. That's what's going on. That they have to somehow prove their value by their performance. God is their creator. Release the pressure. Let the air valve hiss for them. Creator God freely loves young people. They belong to God. Will you declare this to young people? And what that does, this might sound a little odd, is that it actually decenters them. Meaning, they're too much our focus when they're a problem to fix. And allows us first to recenter and reorient on God, which is pointing them in the right direction. God is creator. How might we empower young people to discover who they are as God's good creation? You know, there's a misconception about looking at creation, that we would just marvel in it. Actually, the point of looking at creation and marveling at how wonderful it is to direct our attention to God, the creator and the author. When we look at young people and we say that you are deeply loved by God, you are valuable, it's actually an act of worship of God, not centered just on young people. So God is creator. Who is God? God is creator. God is also redeemer. Here's a little quick overview on some of the purpose research that comes out of positive youth development. Researcher William Damon defines purpose as discovering ways to contribute that are larger than yourself and participating in activities that move towards that end. Purpose is formed in communities, and historically, purpose was more given by just being part of a community. Purpose was kind of adopted. Today, largely, purpose is defined by oneself. Pros and cons from what comes from those two directions. But what we're finding is that young people today lack purpose. They lack a purpose that's larger than themselves. So how do we establish purpose? There's 2 intersecting components that Damon says. Number 1, knowing what the purpose is, so facing in a particular direction. And number 2, acting towards that purpose. What activities move me in a direction of that purpose? So get this. When young people, research demonstrates this. When young people are involved in activities disconnected from purpose, it equals increased stress and anxiety. So if a young person is committed to gymnastics or committed to a sport or committed to playing guitar or percussion or getting good grades, that activity detached from something larger than that activity itself means that their lives, pressure cooker, hang in the balance right there, that they make it or break it at that particular moment, rather than that activity being towards something, towards a larger purpose than who they are and where they're going in their life. That's what purpose is. Purpose that I have a direction where I'm moving, and I'm moving in that direction with purposeful activities. That's kind of interesting to think about. God is creator-redeemer. God is redeemer, meaning that God seeks for those who need him. That God seeks after creation. Declaring God to be our redeemer acknowledges that we are a people with a purpose. And it acknowledges sin and the consequences of sin in our lives. Young people need a redeemer to release them from sin's power, the brokenness and pain of their impulsivity, their carelessness, their self-interest, right like mine. They need a redeemer. Christ is the redeemer who provides for young people. But redemption is never only about what you're released or what you're redeemed from. It's always what you're redeemed for. Do you hear that? Salvation, redemption, is not just what you're redeemed from. It's always what you're redeemed for, meaning it's about purpose. Young people are given purpose by their creator, redeemer. God invites them to face forward. Young people have a purpose already established by God. Young people have a purpose already established by God, our creator, redeemer. So our job is to help them face forward, to acknowledge who God is, to release that pressure valve that they are deeply and freely loved, and they are created for a purpose. So we might help them find a lane to work out and try out and have purposeful activities to connect the activities that they're doing outside the church to something larger than themselves. That one ends up being our role. So how does this play out in this case study? I gave you a bunch of comments at the beginning, and I'm going to respond to them. So we have the pastor that says, let's get to the bottom of these things. Yeah? These families need a life-giving narrative. How about a sermon series on how God is our creator, redeemer? We have someone we want out of youth ministry to do what is valuable. Okay, let's tell the story of their value. God creates freely and loves. We hear Susan, who's talking about avoiding medications, and Larry, who's talking about the need to pay attention to the value of why we medicate. Creator God sustains us as dependent creatures. Therefore, let's work to sustain one another. Raising kids is hard. Raising kids with mental illness is darn hard. We might think of Jamie, who wants to ensure their safety. That's the fear narrative. Safety, yes. Wrap and bubble wrap, no. Decenter, problematizing young people, and recenter on God. And the last one, Sally, who says, let's just take away their phones. Yep, they're making an imprint in their bed instead of an impact to the world. Do they know the story of Creator Redeemer, who has a purpose? How are young people in this church contributing to the mission of this church? How are they part of it rather than just being objects of it? Problematizing young people reduces them to problems to solve, something that we might fix. Yet, Creator Redeemer God calls them freely loved into God's purposes here and now.